Hi, I'm Janine Firpo, and I'd like to welcome you to the third in our series of Fireside Chats in advance of the publication of my book, Activate Your Money, Invest to Grow Your Wealth and Build a Better World. Today, we're going to be talking about Chapter 3, Your Financial Foundation, Master Some Core Principles. And my guest today is Lisa Leff Cooper, who is a chartered financial analyst, a certified financial planner, and president of Figure 8 Investment Strategies. We're going to talk a little bit more about what those titles mean when we get into our conversation. But I want to let you know that Lisa was absolutely instrumental in helping me develop this chapter. And I learned so much from her in the process that I really want to thank her. And I continue to learn from her today. And I think that you will too. So, with that, I'd love to welcome Lisa. Thanks for being on the Activate Your Money Fireside Chats.
Oh, I'm excited to be here. Hello, hello.
Well, when we first met, Lisa, one of the things I learned about you was how passionate you are about helping women not only become confident investors, but also put their money to work in the things that they really care about. So I'm really interested in how you got there. How did you become a chartered financial analyst, a certified financial planner, and a confident investor yourself?
Well, my journey started a while ago, back in the early 1990s. I'm sort of dating myself. And like so many people in this sustainable investing field, I started out doing nonprofit work. I had just graduated with an MBA from Wharton, which is a finance school. But I had focused on management and marketing and public policy and wanted to do something at the intersection of business and doing good in the world. And I didn't come from money. I didn't know much about money. I wasn't intrigued by finance. And so I started out working for this small nonprofit that was in Manhattan and uh, monitoring the behavior of major multinationals around corporate social responsibility before that was even really a thing. It was early days. And while I was doing that, one of the audiences we were delivering those messages to were early social investors who were very interested in what these corporations were doing. And after a little while, one of those entities recruited me to help them build their socially responsible investment discipline. It was really early days for that. I was very lucky to be in the right place at the right time to start this career. And at that point, then it was sort of a whirlwind. And I, yes, became a chartered financial analyst, was an equity analyst, and became a portfolio manager. And for about 20 years, managed mostly public equity, but also balanced portfolios for high net worth individuals and for institutions with significant assets. And then along the way, somewhere in there, I moved from New York City to Boise, Idaho, which is where I am now, and started my own firm about 5 years ago. It's called Figure 8 Investment Strategies.
That's great. It's really funny because our guest last week also started in the nonprofit sector. So it's really interesting that both of you sort of had that trajectory. Both of you didn't think that you could do this finance thing. I didn't either. And that I think is a really important message for the women listening to this is even if you don't think you know how to do this or can't learn this, you can. And you can actually go through some pretty grueling processes if you want, like you did, to really get some very powerful credentials behind you. But what is it in your firm that you're hoping to accomplish and help women with in your firm?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I started Figure 8 for a couple of reasons. And one is that I have loved everything about my career, but I wanted to do some different things. And, I wanted, first of all, to work with not just with people who already had wealth, but to share what I know, to help people on the path who haven't yet been blessed by the opportunity to have significant wealth. And I also wanted to sort of come at it from a different standpoint. I think as an equity analyst, as a portfolio manager, your job is to pick pick the investments that are going to go up and beat the markets. And that's important. But I really wanted to switch gears or sort of step back and look at the bigger picture. And ask questions like, well, what is this money for? What's its purpose? And what are the possibilities for using it to, build the life you want and to accomplish the change you want to accomplish in the world. And that actually led me to do another certification, the Certified Financial Planner, because that's all about helping people make a plan to accomplish all those things in their lives. So Figure 8 is the name of our firm, and the 8 is really important and symbolic to everything that we're doing. It's two aligned circles are 8. It's very balanced, and this theme of balance runs through everything that we do. So it's sort of the balance between the financial and the social, between the domestic and the global, between high net worth investors, sort of traditional investors, and what we call emerging investors. And that's all very important to me as we build this out, that we're thinking about that balance all the way along, and that we're also sharing that philosophy with our clients.
Well, I love that. And it's so in line with what this whole book is about too, and what my mission is too. It's really to democratize what has traditionally been thought as a kind of investing that's only available to the wealthy. And so I love that you are focused on all types of investors and not just a certain type of investor. But that also brings us to some of the core information that's inside this particular financial foundation chapter. And one of the first things that anyone needs to think about before they start investing is that they should have some core structures in place before they become an investor. And we talk about those in the chapter, but could you speak to those a little bit? What are some of the things that you should already be doing before you start thinking about investing your money?
Yeah, I think, investing is something that an awful lot of people can do, especially people who, maybe haven't been thinking of themselves as investors. But it's really important at the outset to realize that any dollars that you're allocating to investing in stocks and bonds and other vehicles are long-term assets, that these are things that you don't need tomorrow or next year, maybe not for at least 3 years. And preferably longer, that these are things that you're going to be invested in for a while. And so that means that you have to be able to sort of generate cash flow to be able to put that money in a long-term bucket. And there are a few things that you need to be able to get to that place. And the first is to make sure that your budget's working, that you have income that's exceeding your expenses, and so that you're not starting to accumulate debt. The second thing is to make sure that you don't have excessive debt, that you have whatever debt you have is manageable. So maybe that's a mortgage, maybe a car loan. But if you have high interest credit card debt, for example, that's something you want to pay off before you think about investing. And finally, it's also important to make sure that you have access to some funds. We call that liquidity access, to make sure that you're covered in emergency circumstances. So we tell people to have at least 3 months, and depending on circumstances, somewhere between 3 to 12 months of living expenses put somewhere that's not your long-term bucket, it's your emergency bucket, to make sure you can access that. There's one exception to all of that, because we say, you need to do those things before you start investing. But the one exception is if you're working for an employer who offers you a retirement plan, a 401k, a 403b, simple IRA, where that employer is matching your contributions, take advantage of that. If you don't, and way too many people miss this, that's thousands of dollars, sometimes thousands of dollars a year, depending on your salary, that you may be missing by not participating in that. So no matter your circumstances, if you're working and you're offered that kind of retirement plan with a company match, absolutely take advantage of that.
That's a great call out. In fact, I was stunned. My last corporate job, I learned how many people were actually using the corporate match. And if I remember correctly, I think it was less than a quarter, if I remember correctly. But I was stunned because it's like free money. And not only that, but when you invest your money that way and you do it starting when you're young, that money just compounds and grows and grows and grows. And what you can end up with at the end of your life can be significant if you take advantage of those things, which actually brings me to another really important point. I have seen in my experience, and I'm not like you, I don't do this for a living, but I have seen women who, have either put their savings in a cash account because they were afraid to take the risk of investing, or they haven't paid enough attention to their retirement accounts. And they get into their later years and they turn around and they realize they don't have enough money. So I'm wondering if you have seen this, or if you've seen other behaviors from women where we are limiting ourselves in some way and keeping ourselves from having the money that we think we need when we are ready to retire, or for some other purchase like a home or any other thing that we're hoping we can use our money for, our children's education.
Yeah. No, first of all, I'll say what I see that works really, really well. And they're basic, the basic things, which is start early if you can, invest regularly if you can. Again, if your income is higher than your expenses and you can take a little piece of that and say, this goes in the long-term bucket, I'm not even going to look at it. That power of compounding is absolutely, powerful. And so that's what works. Unfortunately see a lot of things, that don't work. And I think, for women especially, I think we tend to shy away from risks and sometimes from taking risks that can be good for us. And investing is one of those realms. Investing involves risk. That is, there's a trade-off between the risks you're willing to take and the return that you receive over time. That's not a promise that if you take risk, you will get return, but that's investors who have been willing to take risks over the very long term have done very well. And that's the way money grows, right? So, but a lot of people define risk as the risk of just losing money. So, here you have $100,000 today. Oh, and tomorrow the market goes down, and now you have $80,000, and they're afraid of that. It's the nature of markets to go up and down over the very long term. Again, stocks and bonds have both had an uptrend. So if you have time in the market, you can do very well. There are other definitions of risk that don't get recognized, acknowledged, and sort of acted upon. And one is that if you're not involved in this, even if it's going up and down, you're missing out on that growth. And the other thing is that there is the risk of being subject to inflation. And so if you put your money in cash or a money market that you think is safe, it's not growing. And if it's not growing, it's probably not keeping up with inflation. Inflation basically means the cost of something tomorrow is going to be higher than today. Your dollar will buy less. Your dollar is worth less tomorrow. And so if that dollar isn't working for you and isn't growing, it's actually diminishing in value. And we see this entirely too often where people think they're being safe. And really what they're doing is limiting their opportunity to reach their financial goals. Again, especially if they've got a nice long time horizon. I'll give you an example of a woman that we've worked with, and this is, this happens across all socioeconomic classes and all, education levels. So here's a woman that we worked with who is a successful woman. She's a community leader, and she's made a decent salary, but in the financial crisis in 2008, she got scared. She saw her retirement accounts decline by more than 40%, and she pulled her money out of the markets right at about the bottom and went into a money market. We met with her in 2019 for the first time, and that money had been sitting in a money market for 11 years. So she completely missed the rebound. In Activate Your Money in the book, we talk about this in theory. Well, here we saw it in practice. And now, I think I said she was in her 40s then. And, so now we're 11 years later, she's heading towards 60 and she's not at all ready for retirement, even though she's been putting money aside this whole time. It's not been growing for her. So, that's definitely a risk that too often goes unrecognized.
I think what you're saying is so important. And one of the things that I also am continually astounded by is how many women don't actually look at what they have. They don't pay attention. It's such a mistake. And, one of the things that we do in the chapter and along with it, the companion website, is we're actually pointing women to tools that they can use to figure out how much they need to retire, how much they need for other kinds of purposes. Have they got enough now? What their expenses? I mean, these calculators figure out a whole lot for you. You put in a couple of very simple things and they just go, and they give you really, really powerful data. The other thing, you're talking a lot about risk. And I think one of the things that's also really important is to recognize that there are actually things that are known about risk. So when you put your money into a bond or a bond fund, we know something about what the risk profile of that type of investment is. We know something about the risk profile of our cash. We know something about the risk profile of stocks or any other asset class that you might be considering. And once I think one becomes familiar with what those risk profiles are, begins to understand them, one vis-a-vis the other, that begins to build your confidence in having a willingness to invest in those things. And I've also learned personally that just by experimenting, trying things with smaller bits of money and seeing what happens is another great way to build confidence. I want to take us in a slightly different direction now, because one of the things that I have seen repeatedly as well is that what most people, when you talk about investing, their mind goes immediately to the stock market. It's like, oh, I got to put money in the stock market, right? So for those people who do make that decision to move beyond just putting their money in cash or a very safe investment vehicle, they think about the stock market. And taking that step of, oh, I'm going to put money in the stock market, I think puts the cart before the horse a little bit, because there's something else that you taught me about called asset allocation that I think is really important. And one of the things that I've come to learn is that the decisions you make about your asset allocation are actually more important to your long-term financial health than the specific investments you choose. So could you explain, what does asset allocation mean? What is it? And why is it so important?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and you're absolutely right about asset allocation being a really important concept and one of the first things that you should address as an investor. But first, we have to talk about what assets are, what basic asset classes are. Asset classes are basically sort of the building blocks of your investment portfolio. Asset allocation is how we put those building blocks together. There are a lot of different types of building blocks out there, and you can get really, really fancy with looking at all those different types. But you can also sort of boil it down to look at the basics. And so the basics are stocks, bonds, and cash. And if you get familiar with what those are, the basic parameters of stocks, bonds, and cash, you can powerfully put together an asset allocation that fits your specific goals and risk tolerance, right? So let's look at the asset classes first. Stocks, when you own stock, you actually own a tiny little piece usually of a company. Stocks are also known as equity. Equity is ownership, right? So when you hear equities, public equity, stock, it's all the same things. They're basically synonymous. And so when you own a piece of a company, you are benefiting from what happens with the profits of that company. So as the company does better, you do better. As the company grows, you grow. The company stumbles, that stock stumbles. Usually people don't own just one stock or two stocks. They own a big basket of stocks. So within each asset class, you can allocate across different types of sub-asset classes. Again, I said we weren't going to get too fancy, but basically stocks are your growth engine for your portfolio. And it's the nature of stocks to go up and down. So they're risky. They're probably the riskiest asset class, but they're also the asset class with the highest growth. And in fact, if we go back to the history or the beginning of the history of the public stock markets, stocks on average annually have returned about 10% a year. That's rough. And it's also not promissory. We can't say anything about the future, but we can say that that's what stocks have done in the past. Bonds are also known as fixed income. And bonds, when you own a bond, you're actually owning the promise that someone's going to pay you back. You've made a loan. When you buy a bond, you've made a loan. Sometimes that loan is to the federal government. Sometimes that loan is to a big corporation. Sometimes it's to your local municipality for them to use for a project or for their, for specific operations. And when they borrow from you, they say they're going to pay you back. And what you get paid back is what you loan them, the principal, plus some interest along the way. And that interest typically gets paid in regular income payments, hence the term fixed income. Bonds also grow over time. And again, if we go back to the beginning of the markets, we can say bonds have, on average, annually returned as a whole big asset class, about 5 or 6% annually. They go up and down too, but not anywhere near as much as stocks. So they're less risky and there's less return, but there's still a return. Cash is the other major asset class. And the big benefit of cash is that you can access it. It's liquid. You don't have to sell something to be able to get to it. So cash has value, but cash by its very nature is not growing. It is not working for you. It's not a loan that someone's using to build a project or build their company. It's not ownership in a growing entity like stock is. It's just there. So the big benefit of cash is that it's liquid, accessible. Putting them together into a portfolio is what we call asset allocation. And doing that, it's important that you're diversifying across these different types of asset classes, and that diversification itself helps reduce the risk of your whole pool of investments. And you can design that in a way that fits really well for how much risk you want to take, how much time you have for your investments to grow, how much you need those investments to return to reach your goals, whether that's buying a house or retiring at a certain age. And so that exercise of putting together your asset allocation, how you're going to, sort of divide up your investment pie, is at the heart of investing. And it's, as Janine said, probably the single most important and powerful set of decisions you're going to make.
So that could feel a little intimidating to some women. It's like, oh my God, how am I supposed to put my money together? Yeah. And it really is very unique to each person. Again, investing is very personal. There's not a one size fits all strategy. So making those decisions can feel a little overwhelming, but they don't have to. And we actually help women out in the book because we give them some examples of what would a conservative portfolio look like, what would a more moderate portfolio look like, or even a more aggressive portfolio. And those portfolios will be augmented on the website with even more examples. So we're going to provide women with a lot of information about how other people make these choices. And I think it's also really important to point out that as we have more assets, as we have greater wealth, the amount of diversification or the level of asset allocation that we want to do becomes more significant, because we want our money to be sitting in different kinds of buckets with different types of risk. One of the things that I've learned so much in this process and in my own investing that kind of befuddles me, but you talked about the 3 basic asset classes of cash, fixed income, and public equities. Everything else for financial advisors is called alternatives. So if you invest in private companies, if you invest in Bitcoin, if you invest in gold, if you invest in real estate, if you invest in timber, I mean, all of this stuff is considered alternatives to many financial advisors. So there's all of these different asset classes that most people are not even familiar with or don't even recognize that they have the option to invest in. So we also talk about a lot of that in the book. But what we're doing in this chapter is we're really setting that foundational framework that we've talked about already. And I think what we've mentioned is the importance of being willing to take some risk, the importance of being aware of what you're investing in, the importance of figuring out in advance how much you need and planning toward that and building toward that. And just the whole idea of planning overall, I think is just such an essential element of what we need to do. Some women are going to make the choice to go ahead and do that alone. Some women are going to move toward getting a financial advisor. I mean, I think that, I'm sitting here with a piece of art behind me. At one point in my life, I believed that in order to invest in art, you had to be rich. You didn't invest in art. I mean, I bought posters for my walls. I bought stuff at, wherever I could find it for my walls. Art was way beyond me. And then I realized through some work that I did that actually, if you buy art from a living artist, you could buy it for a couple $100, an original piece of art. And so I bought something and I have never turned back. And every piece of art in my home is an original piece of art that I paid very little for. But I love it all, right? So I kind of realized that there's a bit of an analogy between that and financial advisors. A lot of people think that you don't get a financial advisor unless you're really wealthy. But I think that there is the opportunity for people to have financial advisors at a much earlier stage, that they could even work with advisors for this difficult planning portion. And I'd love for you to speak a little bit about how you see a financial advisor's role potentially in helping women through some of these foundational elements that we're talking about right now.
Yeah, first of all, I think a little bit of knowledge goes a really long way. So while some of this may seem complex and intimidating, just knowing a few things is a whole lot. It can get you a long way down the road. Again, looking back to that example of someone who just says, "Oh, I'm afraid of the markets. I'm just going to go to cash." That's not an empowered place to be, right? So understanding that stocks and bonds are going to help your money grow, that right there is a lot of knowledge. And there are lots of materials, websites, books out there, Activate Your Money among them, that can help you. But there's nothing quite like having someone who's a professional work with you to help you develop a strategy. And, I think our industry is changing. And I think that a lot of people who are professionals who are doing financial advising and planning are very interested in working with people across the wealth spectrum, are interested in working with people at earlier stages, and they're developing ways in which to work with them. So maybe that's, just a single engagement of developing a plan, which can get you started. And it's absolutely a powerful and wonderful thing to do. So I think it is increasingly no longer the province of very wealthy individuals to hire a financial advisor.
That's great. And there's an increasing number of women like you who are not only helping other women learn how to be smart about their money, but also to put it to work in the things they care about. Because for me, that's where the real juice is, right? Of course, I want to make money on my money. And of course, I want to be able to have the things that I want. But that's not enough for me. I also want to know what my money is actually doing. And I think a lot of other women feel very much the same way. So I'm really encouraged to see that piece of this investment conversation increasing as well, because I think it's just integral to how we want to invest as women. I know that one other thing that you think is a really important element of the foundation in terms of getting ready to be an investor or starting on this journey is something called the investment policy statement. So, could you speak a little bit to what that is and why you wanted to make sure that that was part of what we talked about in this chapter?
Absolutely. So again, these are relatively simple concepts that go into the investment policy statement, and everyone can have one, and everyone should have one as they start to invest. This is just a simple framework to lay out your specific parameters, what you're trying to do, and how you plan to go about it. So your investment policy statement, again, can be simple or fancy, but a simple one can just start with, what's this money for? Maybe this is an investment policy statement for your IRA account. So it is by definition, it's for retirement. How many years away is retirement? Define your time horizon. How much would you like this to grow to? Define your return expectations. How much risk are you willing to take along the way? Define whether you're a conservative, low-risk investor or whether you are willing to take some risk. Again, that's often very linked with your time horizon. Investment policy statement, then, right at the heart of it is the asset allocation that you set to meet all of those other specifics. And that asset allocation section might say something like, well, this is a growth-oriented portfolio that has 30 years to grow. And so it's going to be 80% in stocks and 20% in fixed income. That would be a very typical type of thing to see in an investment policy statement. But another part of the investment policy statement that is really important to a lot of investors, and especially a lot of women, is laying out your social and environmental sort of values and guidelines. And so investment policy statements will often say, these are my no-go zones. This is where I don't want to invest. That might include things like tobacco. It might include things like fossil fuels, might include things like private prisons. And then may go on to say, if there are opportunities for me to reach my goals and to invest for social purpose, that might be small businesses led by women, that might be around water scarcity or water quality in the developing world, you name it. That also goes in your investment policy statement. And then this becomes your guidelines. Once you have an investment policy statement, making decisions along the way, very easy, because you just say, does that fit? Okay, here, check. Does that not fit? Okay. And an investment or a financial advisor can help you put that together, but you can also start that on your own.
Right. And we actually give, we have one that's downloadable from the web. So we give examples of this. I mean, I think that while investing can seem like it is just a lot of work, it's like anything, right? You just start with step one and you take these things one step at a time and you do them one step at a time in whatever time frame works for you. And the way the book has been written is that every chapter ends with a take action section where we actually help the reader know what steps they need to take for that particular activity. And then they can move on to the next one. So I just like to, what I think we have talked about today is really the importance of women feeling more confident. And part of the way that they feel more confident is recognizing when they're really ready to become an investor, realizing there's more to investing than just putting your money in the stock market, and really thinking about and planning ahead a little bit using some of the tools that we provide, and thinking through, what is it that this money is for? How much time do you have? What risk appetite do you have? And in the book, we give examples of women, personas that we created, of women who may look like some of the women listening to this particular chat, and the kinds of decisions they're making around those investment strategies and those asset allocations. And those women are also tied back to chapter 2, in that we give them each a financial archetype, and we have talked about what some of their values are. And so you can follow, as you're going through the book, these different personas and seeing how they're making some of these decisions. So I think this has been a great conversation. I really, again, appreciate your being here. I'm wondering if there's any last thoughts you have, or if there's one thing that listeners would take away from today's conversation, what might that be?
I think it's something we've talked about quite a bit through our conversation, which is don't be intimidated. You got this, and I think our industry does a very good job of making people think that um, that investing is out of reach for most people, and that, oh, you need a lot of help, because we're going to use a lot of fancy terms. You can do this, and remember that if something doesn't make sense to you, it probably doesn't make sense. And address, go into this with a little bit of knowledge and a lot of confidence. And
that is such a great ending message. And the thing about, if it doesn't make sense to you, it probably doesn't make sense. I love it, because I have had financial advisors tell me that I should invest in certain things. They can't really explain them to me. I don't understand them, and I choose not to invest. And I have seen that some of those decisions I made were good ones, because the investment didn't actually end up coming to the kind of outcome that I had been told it might. So I think that advice of knowing and doing your homework a little bit, so that you know what things are, and not investing in something that you don't understand, is incredibly powerful. And the fact that yes, you can, is such an important message too. And that there are a whole lot of women out there who are there to back you up. And that is part of what we're doing too with Activate Your Money, and all of the activities surrounding it, is to help you find those champions for your work. So with that, I thank you again, and I invite you all to join us on our next session. What we are going to be doing there is we're going to be moving away from sort of the foundational elements that we've talked about over the last 3 sessions, and we're going to move into really the heart of the book, which is part 2. And what we're doing in part 2 is we are literally going to be going asset class by asset class, talking about what they are, how they work, how traditional investing works in that asset class, and then how you can find values aligned options within that asset class. And the very first asset class that we're going to be talking about is cash. And so one of the things that I want to say about that is that many of us don't even think of our cash as an investment, but it is, in my view, because when you put your cash in a bank, or you put your cash wherever you're going to put it, somebody is using your money to do something. So you are investing. You may not be getting a great return, but you're investing in that you are giving your money to somebody else who is going to use it for their purposes. And in return, they are giving you financial gain back. So cash, in my view, is an investment. And we're going to talk about how that works, where many people have their money invested, and a whole range of options that you have to put your money to work in your communities, in support of agriculture, in support of whatever it is that you care about. You can do that with your checking and savings account without putting that money at risk. So join us next week, same place, same time, for that next conversation. Thanks again, Lisa. Great seeing you.
Thank you, Janine.